Hello everyone, in this recording we're going to discuss a case study involving topic models. Before working through this case study though, I think it's interesting to think about where we're at. Because for so much of this class, we've been focusing on just visualizing the raw data. We never did any kind of intermediate processing. But right now what we've done is we've fit some sort of intermediate model, in this case a topic model, before doing the visualization. Right? Why is this interesting? I think it's interesting because models create a certain kind of abstraction of the raw data. Right? Instead of working through every single sample or looking at every single word, we've developed a sort of intermediate abstraction called a topic. And we're able to now reason at this higher level related to topics. Right? So this is kind of the ideal. Whenever you have any kind of model, you wish that it learns these meaningful high-level abstractions, and you can do your science, you can do your reasoning through those high-level abstractions rather than raw samples. Now, the difficulty is that in practice, it can be actually really challenging to learn the right abstraction. You might fit a model, think everything is great, but then realize after the fact that those abstractions are not actually that faithful to the raw data. This is one of the complexity of doing data science. So how can we address this? This paper has some interesting suggestions. One of their core principles is that you should interpret but verify. Right? By interpret, they mean you should make models that are really directly amenable to visualization. You shouldn't just make models that perform some sort of mathematical task well. You should make them really meaningful for human consumption. And then the second thing is that you shouldn't just trust the parameters that are estimated by the model. You should try to verify them. Right? They go so far as to say it's the designer's responsibility to make sure that once you fit a model, you can go and link all its estimates back to the raw data. Right? You can verify that whatever abstractions you've learned, you can get evidence for them through the raw data. Okay, so this is very philosophical. Let's see how they actually did it in one of their examples. Right. So they were working through a project called the Stanford Dissertation Browser. So what they wanted to do is, the leadership of the university had asked, we have the text data from all the dissertations for, I think it was 1993 to 2010, something almost 20 years of data. Right? And you wanted to see whether, how do interdisciplinary projects really get going? Right? Does interdisciplinarity actually lead to better science? Right? That's a natural question that you might have if you're a university administrator. Right? So what researchers wanted to be able to do is kind of go through this large corpora of all the different dissertation texts and try to understand how interdisciplinary are these different PhD theses, which departments are building links between one another, what are the trends over time. Okay. So they had a lot of different initial visualizations they discussed. One of them was doing a kind of dimensionality reduction on the topic model similarities. Right? So you can imagine that once you have for every dissertation, you can assign it a mixture of topics. Right? You can start saying how similar are the different departments. Right? If two departments tend to have theses where the topics for those theses are overlapping, then you can say that those departments are pretty similar. Right. So you end up with this big similarity matrix. You can do dimensionality reduction on that similarity matrix, and it was giving a plot that looked like this. And they thought it was, kind of fascinating that, oh, it looks like petroleum engineering is moving close to biology. Right? And that's what you would see in the dimensionality reduction. But it turned out that if you look at the raw similarities, this is just an artifact of the dimensionality reduction. Remember, when you go from high dimensions to low dimensions, you always have to make some sort of distortion. You can never perfectly preserve the original distances. So there was some distortion going on here that artificially made petroleum engineering look similar to biology. Right? So that's an example where you really would want to go back and look at the original theses in the petroleum engineering department and see, do they really have topics related to biology? Right. So they have some examples where they would go back and forth between that original approaches to visualization and then some refined approaches. And each time they would get feedback from people who cared about the results of the study, and they would modify their visualizations accordingly. Right? So here's an example of the original one. Here's what they ended up with at the end. So they didn't even use dimensionality reduction to visualize the departmental similarities at the end. All they did is you could click on a department, it would move that department to the center of a circle. You would sort all the departments according to what division they're in, and then alphabetically. So all the purple, these are all the medical division. The blue here, these are engineering departments. Green, these are science, basic science departments, right? And then the similarity of the center, the focus department, and all these other departments is based on, it was encoded by the radial distance, right? So these two circles are really close to one another. That means civil engineering and petroleum engineering were really close to one another. Same aerospace and petroleum engineering very close to one another. But then medical very far away, right? So this avoided any dimensionality reduction. You can start seeing the similarities of the departments. You can even see the similarity over time, right? So the gray are how the departments are drifting closer and further away over time. Right? So in the original paper, they have a few other examples where you have this kind of initial approach, which seems reasonable, but then you start noticing artifacts, you redesign to try to mitigate those issues. Okay. So some of the takeaways that they had. So first, they say, make sure you think about what are the units of analysis, right? The models and the visualization should all be linked along these units of analysis. The second, make sure that whatever abstractions you're learning, whatever abstractions you've built, are really meaningful, right? You might have discovered some abstraction that actually doesn't really make any sense. It's not actually backed by the data. And related to that is you should make it possible in the visualization itself to link that abstraction to the raw data, the raw evidence. They call this process progressive disclosure. So in practice, what this looked like, the units of analysis in their browser, these were departments and theses, right? You could think there could have been other ways of structuring this. Maybe you would have wanted to do by words, right? But instead they say, actually, when you think about the users of this browser, they're really going to want to be able to look at the dissertation level and at the departmental level. They don't care about who the people were. They don't care about the labs involved. They just care about these units, right? And that you can link now to interesting metadata. Okay. For verification, they did a few different kinds of evaluation, right? First, they did some quantitative evaluation. You can look at what is the quality of my topic model. They also did formal user studies. So they would give a version of the visualization to many potential users and try to gather feedback. And then they could revise their models, they can revise their visualizations based on these user feedback. Okay. For progressive disclosure, they were doing something called semantic zooming. Right? So the idea in semantic zooming is you would start off at a view that's like this, where the units of analysis that you see are just the departments. But then when you said, I want to know a little bit more about this one department, what it would let you do is you could switch to a thesis view, right? And it would show you every single thesis for that department. Right? And then you could see that thesis, it's aligned to the departments that are close to it, right? So if a thesis is a mixture of both linguistics and computer science topics, you would see it along that axis of the linguistics computer science axis. And then you could hover over the point and see the abstract of that thesis, right? So that's kind of nice because now, even though we're mainly thinking on this kind of topic level and the department high-level abstractions, you're able to link it back to the raw data. Right? These were the things that went into the topic models in the first place. Right? So you're able to scale the different levels of the ladder of abstraction. Right? Very high level of abstraction, these are the things that are output by the model. It gives you an overview of the data. But then if you've demonstrated interest in some specific subset, and like some specific aspect of this abstraction, then you can go back and reveal the raw data associated with it. Okay, so this has just been one example of how you can link visualization and modeling together. Right? Sometimes people think about these as being really distinct activities, but really they're very complementary. They're just different ways of reasoning, different ways of building useful abstractions. And I've linked to a few kind of example papers and example workshops where you can find a lot of papers that are kind of similar in spirit as this one.